Now I'm delighted to introduce Julie Onslow Cole. We've already mentioned about the movement to labour, and so mobility is our next theme.
Thank you. So I'm head of PwC's Global Immigration group, and we have about 2,000 people working in that group, and we have operations in 154 countries. And we advise clients on mobility around the world, and also students, and we also advise on many governments around the world, and we look at the refugee crisis. And I travel all the time. In the last 3 weeks, I was at the UN speaking on migration issues to do with the refugee crisis. I was then in the Middle East talking at Brexit conferences and to inward investors into the UK. And then I was at Birmingham at the Conservative Party conference, and I spoke 3 times at the conference on immigration and economic issues. And I think it's quite useful if we draw back and look at Brexit through this global lens and look and see, where we are in the world. And I think in the world we are at a time of great political instability. And the refugee crisis, I think, really quite dominates the global landscape. We have 60 million displaced people across the world, and there's like a pincer movement onto Europe. So there are many people leaving, and because of the drop in the oil prices, there's a lot of economic migrants that are still leaving through Africa, and because of the situation in Libya and the border in Egypt, they're coming across into Europe. And then because of the situation in Syria, we're getting a lot of migration from Syria through Turkey into Greece. And in addition, the Yemen is in a very, very difficult position. There's about 82% of people in the Yemen are living on humanitarian aid. And if things get worse in the Yemen, then the numbers of migrants we'll see coming from the Yemen will be far greater than we saw, that we are seeing and have seen from Syria. Now, this is really important because I think if you look at the global refugee crisis, which came on the top of global economic downturn, these two things together have really triggered a kind of anti-globalization, anti-migrant feeling. And you see that a lot in Europe, and you're seeing what's happening in Europe because of this, but you're also seeing it in the US and all really globally. And I don't agree that with what's been said, that migration is the only issue that the government is actually concerned about now. And I think a lot of good things are being done. I think Philip Hammond in particular really understands the financial sector, and I think he understands about trade, and that he's trying to look at immediate problems such as financial passporting. But I think what the government feels is that there is a real cry in the fact that we have had this vote in the way it has happened for Brexit, and that there is something that really needs to be addressed. And I think that one of the things that is coming out of this is that business needs to take action and address some of the strong feelings coming out of the result of the referendum. And the CBI did a poll in the last month, and it showed that more than 53% of people believe that business didn't actually contribute to the community. And I think business as a whole is actually looking to see, what they need to be doing and to sort of readdress their own position. If you look at what's happening in Europe, I think in heads of states in Europe, they recognise this sort of anti-migration, sort of anti-global feeling. They recognise that there's a lot of problems, and they recognise that perhaps, there is a need to look again at the way their European Union is structured. But there's a complete bifurcation in the thinking about that and the thinking about the UK and UK leaving Europe. And on that, there is a very strong feeling at the moment, a very strong feeling that we can't pick and choose, and that for the UK, freedom of movement is absolutely an essential freedom, and that it would be very difficult for us to ask for other aspects, for trade deals, and not take freedom of movement. and I had a lunch last week with the US Senator who'd just come back from talks with Angela Merkel, and he underscored that very much was the current feeling. So the government's looking at immigration, and obviously one of the results of Brexit will be that there will be much hardening of the rules related to EU migration. But it is an opportunity for the government to look holistically at all our immigration rules, because one of the things that has been happening over the years is that because of the net migration target and EU migration hasn't been something that the government could control, there has seemed to be a real hardening down on business immigration and students. And I think that hopefully, and I passionately believe that the student rules shouldn't be changed, I think that this does present an opportunity to look at things holistically. And I think it's a little unfortunate about Amber Rudd's statement at the party conference, and I think those statements have been kind of realigned and are not really representative of what the government's views are on migration. We're working very closely with London First, and I must say I agree with everything that Will said, and we're looking at different options on migration, and one of the things that we're looking at is perhaps an emphasis on regional growth and regional visas. And also with the government, we're looking at different ways of how the new migration policy could be affected, which actually would help the university sectors, help business, and not have too much of an impact on the economy. But my last point is that I don't agree either that the next 4 years are just going to be a waste of time. I think actually it is an opportunity to look again at new ideas and new thinking, but it will only be an opportunity if everybody is allowed to take part in a debate and speak frankly and openly about what the issues are. And what is rather concerning is that at the moment it seems difficult for certain voices to be heard, and I think it is really necessary to have a real open debate. And one of the examples that I wanted to finish with is that there was a debate about the need for business to have low-skilled EU migration, and that debate was conducted in a room in the House of Commons. It wasn't a public debate, it was just a private debate with employers of big industries that employed a lot of low-skilled EU migrants. And they were explaining that one of the difficulties that they had was not relating to just immigration, but it was related to historic problems with the way skills training have been implemented in the UK, courses, educational courses, the availability of certain educational courses. But they felt that it was very difficult for them to speak up about these things, because as soon as they did, then it was portrayed that business is just trying to speak up about bringing lots of low-skilled EU migration and maybe undercutting wages. So I think that there are lots of issues that need to be tackled that have occurred as a result of the Brexit decision. And all I would say is that it's really, really important that we have an open debate and all the aspects of the underlying causes are examined. And what happens next is very, very important, because people are very much focusing on the long term. So what is the long-term outcome for Brexit? But really, the long-term outcome is far, far away, years away. So what's going to really matter for everybody is what we get in the transition agreement. And there's not a lot in the media about that, but everything will matter about transition, because you will not be able to negotiate a big agreement. It's going to take a long time, and then at the end of that process, as we know, 27 countries need to either take that back for a referendum or they have to put it through their own parliament. So that's far down the line. But we will have to have a transitional agreement, and that transitional agreement will help the issue of instability, and it will give us a roadmap of exactly what's going to happen on the way forward. So I think that's what everyone should now be concentrated on. Thank you.